بسم الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي دل على وجوب وجوده افتقار الممكنات وعلى قدرته وعلمه أحكام المصنوعات المتعالي عن مشابهة الجسمانيات والصلاة والسلام على صاحب الآيات والبينات سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي الدين صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima al-Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we continue within this series, we've arrived at the next chapter from the concluding juz, the concluding section of the Quran. And the next chapter of analysis is the 109th chapter of the Quran, which consists of a mere 6 verses. One of them is repeated 2 times, and that is that chapter known as Suratul Kafirun. You see, the theme of this chapter is a theme which is very relevant to each and every one of us. Because the theme within this chapter is that Allah is reminding mankind that, oh mankind, when it comes to belief in the oneness of God, when it comes to your aqaid, when it comes to your belief, there is no compromising within this realm. And even over here, we find that the Quran has emphasized this in a number of different places. You know, when you look in Surah Luqman, which is the 31st chapter of the Quran, there is the famous advice that Luqman gives towards his son. And the Quran begins speaking of this advice in verse number 13. And it says, قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِدُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. That Luqman says to his son that, oh my son, while he was advising him, do not ascribe partners to Allah, for verily this is a great injustice. But then after that, he begins to speak about goodness towards the parents. And when Luqman speaks of this goodness towards the parents, he mentions something which is very interesting and something which relates back towards the chapter Suratul Kafirun. Over here, Luqman, he says, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ, that we have enjoined mankind to show goodness towards his parents. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. And then it mentions that the mother of a person carries that child in difficulty after difficulty, and the summary of the end of this verse is to give thanks towards your parents. But after that, Luqman, he mentions an exception. That exception is this: وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِي ما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما وصاحبهما في الدنيا معروفا. He says after that yes, the general rule is you obey your parents, you follow your parents. But if they were to tell you to ascribe partners towards me, then do not obey them, but accompany them in this world in a kind manner, but don't obey them in this regard. In other words, a central theme of the Quran is that even if somebody is as close as your parents and they are somebody who are encouraging you towards incorrect belief, yes, you deal with them in a kind manner, but at the same time, there is no compromising. You know, we need to ask ourselves, in order to understand this chapter, why was Suratul Kafirun revealed? It is stated that the reason of the revelation of this chapter, Suratul Kafirun, is that the leaders of Makkah, the head of the Quraysh, had tried everything to stop Rasulullah. They tried to give wealth to the Prophet rejected. They said that we will marry you to the most beautiful of the women within our land, Rasulullah rejected. They said to the Prophet, then after that, we will try to coerce you. We will put an economic blockade on you. We will make your life so hard that this religion that you're preaching, you'll stop preaching this religion. Rasulullah, he doesn't stop. You know, when you go to a courtroom, after you have tried everything and it looks like you're about to lose the case, what do you do at that moment? You settle. You bring forth a settlement. When they recognized that nothing was working, they said, you know what? We'll bring a settlement to Rasulullah. And the settlement is this, is that 1 year you will worship our idols, and the next year we will worship your Allah. In that way, we are happy because we get to keep our idols, and in that way, you are happy because we end up worshiping Allah over there. You see, what this chapter it went to show is that these individuals, they did not have certainty within their false beliefs. Because if they were certain, a person was certain in his belief will never compromise. If you have 100% certainty, you will never say 1 year we will worship this, and another year we will worship that. So what Surah Al-Kafirun it does is that it exposes the weakness within their belief, and it shows the strength of the belief that Rasulullah had within the religion. You see, if one has a small number of followers and somebody comes and they makes an offer that is going to make their life easier, to reject that offer is different than when you are at a position of strength. If these individuals had come to Rasulullah in Medina and Rasulullah rejected them in Medina, then somebody could have said that, look at this prophet, when he was weak, he wanted to make friends with them. But now that he is strong and in a position of strength, he doesn't even want to speak to anyone else. But in Makkah, in that time period where Rasulullah was at his weakest, when his followers did not go beyond more than a few hundred, even then Rasulullah, he addresses them and he says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. The question that comes in the analysis of this chapter is that if we remove this qul, is this a complete thought and a complete chapter? If we remove the word qul over here, and this chapter simply says, Ya ayyuhal kafirun la a'budu ma ta'budun wa la antum a'biduna ma a'bud ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي الدين. If it just begins by saying, oh disbelievers, all the way to the end, it's still a complete thought. But over here, when the kuffar are being addressed, Allah, he says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, O Rasulullah, O my Habib, O my Prophet, O Muhammad, say to them. You see, one of the philosophies behind this qul over here is that those kuffar, they address the Prophet. And over here, the Prophet is replying, but Allah is delivering the message. So if Rasulullah replied without saying qul, he, and it simply said ya ayyuhal kafirun, then there would be no consistency within the dialogue. But they said to Rasulullah that 1 year you worship our idols, the next year we will worship your Allah. And now Allah says to the Prophet, O Prophet, you tell them, and you say to them, Ya ayyuhal kafirun, O disbelievers. You see, it's quite strange that these individuals are addressed with this word, Ya ayyuhal kafirun. And for us to understand that why were they given this title over here, or why they were given this address, we need to understand that what does the word kafir mean? You know, the word kafir, to the surprise of many, is not an insult. It is not a form of cursing another individual. All kafir means is to reject a belief or an idea. You know, these individuals, they rejected the belief in Allah which the Prophet Muhammad was propagating, and because they rejected that, they were called kafir. You know, even when you look within the Quran, and you look at the verse which comes after Ayatul Kursi, within that verse, the word kafir is used, but in a positive connotation, which is very interesting. It's used in a positive connotation. So the verse, it says that فَمَن يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ كَفَرَ يَكْفُرُ فَمَن يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى. That those who reject the oppressors, those who cause corruption within the land, those who do kufr of the taghut and believe in Allah, they've held on to the most firm of ropes. So over here, the Quran is using the word kafir in a positive connotation. And what this goes to show is that the word kafir, it simply means to deny something. That's why, you know, the literal meaning of the word kafir, the linguistic meaning of the word kafir is to cover something. That's why when you look within the Quran, there's one verse within the Quran where the word kafir is even used in the literal meaning within the book of Allah. When you look at this word over here, you find that when you go towards chapter number 57, Suratul Hadid, Allah within that chapter, He says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْبٌ وَزِينَةٌ وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَكُمْ وَتَكَاثُرٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. He says the example of this world is that it is just play and diversion, and it is a means of you boasting amongst each other, and it is a means for you to gather wealth and children. But then after that, Allah, He gives an example of this world. And when He gives an example of this world, He uses the word kafir in a literal sense in this ayat. And Allah, when He uses the word kafir in a literal sense, He says the example of this world, كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. That the example of this world is like a rain cloud which astonishes the farmer by the plants which come forward. What word is being used for farmer? The word being used for farmer over here is أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارِ. That a farmer is called a kafir over here. The reason he is called a kafir is because in the literal sense, a farmer is somebody who covers the seeds within the ground, and when he covers the seeds within the ground in the dirt, and you find the plants, they begin to come forth. When a disbeliever is called a kafir, one philosophy behind that is not that they are ignorant of something. It is not that they don't know something, but rather that pure nature which God has created them upon, they are covering that nature of theirs. Because the belief in God is within every single person's nature. You know, an individual comes to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And when he comes to the Imam, he says to the Imam, Dallani ala Allah ma huwa. That, oh Imam, can you give me a proof for the existence of God? The Imam replies to him by saying, oh man, have you ever been upon a ship in the ocean? And has that ship ever capsized? And when that ship had capsized and you were in the middle of the ocean and there was no one there to help you, were you hopeful or were you hopeless? The man says, even in that moment, in the darkest moment, I was hopeful over there. He says, what you call hope, we call Allah. In other words, every single human being, they have an inclination towards a higher power. Sometimes they just misdirect it. Sometimes they misunderstand what that higher power is. You know, that person who makes wealth his only goal within his life, in reality, he is seeking power via the means of that wealth. But when he reaches that final destination, even that person will recognize that, no, this did not bring me that 100% satisfaction. So this person was seeking a form of perfection. And in reality, that perfection was misdirected. What he thought was perfection was not in reality perfection. So a kafir is not an individual that we are cursing. We are not somebody, we are insulting them. But the word kafir means is that these individuals have covered that nature which Allah had created them upon, and they are not following that belief of the religion of God. So Rasulullah, he says to these kuffar, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. You know, if you invited me to lunch, and I said to you, I will not go to lunch at your house, and you will not come to lunch at my house, and I will not go to lunch at your house, and you will not come to lunch at my house, and I will not go to lunch at your house, and you won't come to lunch at my house, you know, you'll begin to think that this guy is insane. You know, all I said is I invited him to lunch, and 3 times he repeated the same statement. Now over here within this ayah, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, that say to the disbelievers, لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ, I will not worship what you worship, nor will you worship what I worship, nor will I worship what you worship, nor will you worship what I worship. So Allah, He's repeating these lines, لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد. So, oh Allah, you could have simply said it one time, that we will not worship what you worship and you will not worship what I worship, end of discussion. So what is the need for this repetition within this chapter? You see, over here, the scholars of tafsir, they brought forth different reasoning. The first reason as to why they say there is repetition within this chapter is because when a topic and a subject is of great importance, you repeat it. You know, many of you have children. When something is important to your child, for the guidance of your child, you won't just tell him one time, you'll tell him 5 times, 10 times, every occasion that you get. Over here in the Quran, oftentimes when things carry a great significance, Allah repeats them time and time again. Many of you have read Surah Ar-Rahman. Within that chapter, what do you say? فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Which one of these bounties of your Lord will you deny? Or for example, in a different chapter, it says, كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. Soon you all will know, and then it repeats it once again, and soon you will know. إِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا, that verily ease comes with hardship, and indeed ease comes with hardship. So Allah over here, one opinion as to why there is repetition within this chapter is because this idea of holding on to one's belief and not compromising within their belief is such an important idea that there needs to be repetition and it needs to be said more than one time. This is the first opinion. Now, the second opinion as to why there is repetition in this chapter is because Allah is negating things in a different tense. Over here, this is where things get a little bit technical. So I'll mention it in the simplest of terms and I'll move on. You know, in Arabic, a present tense verb can mean the present or it can mean the future. In English, when we speak, it's usually past tense, present tense, future tense. I ate, past tense. I am eating, present tense. I will eat, future tense. But in Arabic, you have past tense. For example, daraba, he hit in the past tense. Yadribu, he is hitting or he will hit. So the same word, it can mean present tense or it can mean future tense. Now, the question is, when you have a present tense verb, there are two ways to negate it. When you add the letter ma, the particle ma, you are negating it in the current tense. And when you add la, you are negating it in the future tense. So over here, if we examine these verses again, there is no repetition going on in actuality. Each of these lines is different. You say, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. I will not worship what you are worshiping right now. Then after that, it says, وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. Nor will you worship what I am worshiping right now. Then after that, it says, وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدْتُمْ. Nor will I worship what you are worshiping, nor will you worship what I am worshiping. So from one angle, two of these verses are similar, two are different. Two of them are negating their worship, and two of them are negating the worship of the Prophet being like their worship. But if you look farther and deeper at the linguistics of this verse, the first portion of the verse says, La a'budu ma ta'budun. The focus over here, when it says, I will not worship what you are worshiping, the focus is on the object of worship. In other words, what you worship is different from what I worship. But when it says, وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ, nor are you worshippers of my worship, over here the focus is upon the ibadah. And I'll give you I know it gets a little bit complex, but the quick summary is this, is that in two of these lines, Rasulullah is saying that your object of worship is not like our Allah. And in two of these lines, the Prophet is saying by virtue of that, your ibadat is not like our ibadat. So you find that each of these different verses, even though they may seem to show repetition, there are intricacies within each of these verses over here. You see, these kuffar of Quraysh, they offered everything to Rasulullah which is possible to make an individual go astray. They said to the Prophet that we will put you in a position of power. Rasulullah rejects that power. They said we'll place wealth in front of you. Rasulullah, he rejects that wealth. They said that we will appeal to your desires by giving you the most beautiful of our women. Rasulullah, he rejects that. Is there anything outside of those carnal desires, wealth and power, which could make a person go astray? But what does the Prophet reply to them by saying? The Prophet, he says to them that even if you put the sun in my right hand, and you put the moon in my left hand, I will never leave the religion of Allah. You know, for them to put the sun and the moon in the hand of Rasulullah is impossible. And for the sun and the moon to come into a hand of an individual is impossible. Rasulullah gave an example by an impossible act. In other words, he is telling these kuffar, in the way it is impossible for you to put the sun and the moon within my hands, in the same way it is impossible for me to go against my religion and to compromise upon my belief. Lakum dinakum waliyuddin. Your religion is exclusive to you, and my religion is exclusive to me. Over here, it says lakum. You know, in Arabic, there are different types of lam which are used in the Arabic language. Sometimes lam can be used for emphasis. For example, thumma la tus'alunna yawma idin anin na'im. That verily you will be asked about the greatest of Allah's blessing. Sometimes lam is used for possessionship. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That indeed we belong, we are the possession of Allah, and to Him we will return. But sometimes lam is used to show something which is exclusive to a group. And over here, it is used in that third meaning. We are saying that your religion of worshiping idols is exclusive to you, and our religion of worshiping Allah is exclusive to us. In other words, that we will not compromise upon this reality. And with that said, that is the conclusion of this analysis of Surah Al-Kafirun. We raise our hands and we say, Oh Allah, through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, we pray for our marhumeen, that you help them within these times, that you enlighten their graves, you grant them the intercession of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we pray for the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. زيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله خاتم النبيين. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة سيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى ناصح الأمين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم يا قصة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء. السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس أنيس النفوس. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن وكعبة الإيمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.